Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mantalena. I am a senior scientist at the Institute of Microelectronics in Singapore. And today I will be talking to you about a preliminary evaluation of a multi-angle spatial compounding imaging scheme using pMUTs. This work has been conducted with our lab and fab collaborators, STMicroelectronics. Quickly going through the overview for this presentation, I will first go through the background, motivation, and objective for this work. I will continue with a theoretical background on spatial beamforming, spatial compounding. I will then present the proposed compounding methodology, and I will then continue with the experimental evaluation, first describing the experimental settings, and then going into the analysis of results, and I will sum up this presentation with the conclusions. So a little bit on the background and motivation for this work. Generally speaking, transmit focusing is the preferred method when we want to improve the lateral resolution, as we are actually narrowing a lot the ultrasonic beam. Several references in the literature have done that. I've included some of them here. So in one, the group from the Technical University of Leuven, they've effectively presented a benchmarking exercise using a very high frequency pMUTs, approximately 2 megahertz, for beamforming, and they've evaluated a number of different algorithms from delay and sum, delay multiply and sum, and minimum variance in order to determine which of the algorithms is effectively optimizing the result when we consider transmit focusing. And they've effectively indicated, as we will see in the figure in the middle, that ideally with transmit focusing you want to have a very low full width half maximum, which will determine your lateral resolution, while keeping your contrast to noise ratio very high. And in their case, they determined that, based on the experimental evaluation, that is the calibrated delay and sum, followed by delay multiply and sum. With this work, they effectively achieved a very impressive lateral resolution, which is close to 1 millimeter. In the second reference I've included here, it's the group from UC Davis. They've effectively used, again, a very large array, specifically 128 channels of pMUTs, and they've used transmit focusing, but instead of using the full array, they've considered subgroup beamforming. So effectively, they've split the array in even and odd channels, and they've used transmit focusing like that. And that effectively enabled them to have a very narrow beam, specifically 90 micrometers, and that enabled them to, as you see in the last figure, be able to resolve very fine features as small as 400 to 600 micrometers. And in the final reference, we proposed long-range high-resolution imaging using silicon or nothing scandium aluminum nitride pMUTs. And again, we have been able to demonstrate effectively the ability to use silicon or nothing pMUTs to resolve reflectors as close as 5 millimeters. So all in all, we can say that lateral resolution can be achieved when you use transmit focusing. However, there is going to be, the signal to noise ratio will suffer because of the contrast ratio. And that is fundamentally because of clutter and speckle artifact. Clutter sometimes can be in the form of the second echo of the reflector. So with this in mind, ideally we would be looking into an appropriate actuation mechanism along with suitable post-processing algorithms to be able to leverage on those disadvantages and be able to improve the lateral resolution, the signal to noise ratio, through the suppression of the speckle and the clutter. Which brings us to this work, which effectively introduces a feasibility study using multi-angle image compounding, using a linear array of PCT pMUTs to be able to suppress the clutter and the speckle artifact. So let's look a little bit on the theoretical background of spatial compounding. So typically, spatial compounding achieves, so typically a specific region of the propagation medium is scanned using several angles by beam steering your beam using insonification, and you combine all these received data from different steering angles in order to create a single image. Now, assume that you have here your array. What you're effectively doing, you are scanning at a positive angle plus theta, along using the equation below to determine the delays to be applied to the transmit data, and then you are scanning also at the zero angle and then at the minus theta angle. So you're effectively scanning through. what this achieves is that you end up effectively with this triangular region in maroon, which is called the compounded region, and it's effectively a more sensitive region, as it's going to be free of specular artifacts and general image clutter. Now here you can see a little bit the post-processing methodology. So to begin with, we use the array to actuate using beam steering at different angles. And the specific pMUT array we've used had very narrow field of view, which means that when you beam steer, you're actually creating narrow beams. Once you have the received data at each steering angle, you feed them to the post-processing pipeline. Initially, you need to timeline the out-of-phase signals using the delays that you've used to actuate the different channels. And once you have the in-phase signals, then you need to calibrate them in order to remove the static undesired signal contributions in the data. Once you've calibrated them, then you apply the Hilbert transform to calculate the envelope, and then you feed the data to the delay and sum. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we've scanned at different angles. The steering angle that we use needs to abide to that equation, so it needs to be within the negative half field of view and the positive half field of view. And we've experimentally evaluated that empirically the values that we will use is minus 11 degrees, 0 degrees, and 11 degrees. So through this process, effectively, you end up with 3 images that you then need to compound to create your final image. Just to point out that for the calibration, we proposed a different algorithm, which is based on sliding window autocorrelation, and you are effectively trying to calibrate out the undesired signal contributions using this G tau function at the top, which I'll describe to you later. So with regards to the data acquisition experimental settings, you see here in the optical image the pMUT array we've used. It consists of 18 channels, and they are distributed in 2 identical dies placed next to each other, and they are, as they are wire bonded on the same PCB. Each die has 9 channels, and each channel comprises of 36 membranes, distributed in 2 columns per channel, with each column having 18 membranes. This pMUT array has a 6.5 MHz resonance frequency, and as I mentioned earlier, the field of view is 30 degrees. To begin with, the array is submerged in a tank filled with fluorine at FC70, which is a low-loss liquid that's typically used for validation of such arrays in immersion, and we've used Verasonics for the actuation and data capture. With regards to evaluating the proposed compounding methodology and the calibration technique, we've used a 3 mm diameter metal reflector, which was placed above the second die at 4 mm away. For the actuation, all the channels are actuated with a 5-cycle sinusoidal waveform. And again, as I mentioned, the beam steering considers 3 angles, minus 11 degrees, 0 degrees, and plus 11 degrees. Here we can effectively see how the calibration method works. So the proposed calibration method estimates a sequence which is called G of tau. And you can see that this curve has a constant value, as we see with the red color, which effectively denotes the similarity between the early part of the signal between the 2 signals that you compare. And that is the received signal from a channel with a template signal from the same channel, which effectively is conducted using the same setup, but without the reflectors present. So effectively, that part shows the similarity between the blue and the black curves. So at some point, effectively, that similarity stops, because you see that the red curve, it has a magnitude jump. And that magnitude jump is due to the fact that you are going to have the echo there. You see it over there. So that jump effectively denotes that you no longer have the similarity. And effectively, you can use that time instant where the jump occurs to be able to suppress the early time signal contribution by setting it to 0. And that effectively, in this case, with the experiments we've conducted, it can come as close as 2.5 millimeters in terms of the suppression window, which effectively translates to the fact that you can put reflectors as close to 2.5 centimeters to your array. Now, in terms of evaluating the proposed compounding methodology, once we remove the early time signal contributions, we considered the proposed method and compared it against what we think is the state of the art, and that could be effectively using the array actuated at the same time, using common source without any delays, and at the same time using the received data and feeding them to delay and sum to obtain a simple image. So you can see at the top figure, this is effectively the combination of the classic actuation with a classic post-processing algorithm. The reflector can be detected, it can be reconstructed from the image reliably. However, there is significant speckle artifact. For example, there you can see the second echo at 8 millimeters, and that effectively creates more noise within the image. If you measure the signal-to-noise ratio, that would be equal to minus 27.5 dB, so quite low. On the other hand, when you use the proposed compounding image methodology, you end up with a more superior image because you end up cancelling out all that speckle and artifact and noise. And the interesting thing is that although you expect the compounded region, the triangular region, to be suppressed, it's actually expanding beyond that. And you can see the image is really clear. And also the SNR is very high, 6.3 dB. So the superiority of the method is actually quite evident with a 20 dB SNR enhancement. Just to sum up, this work demonstrates for the first time a feasibility study for multi-angle spatial compounding using pMUTs. We also proposed a novel calibration method using sliding window autocorrelation, and we can effectively use this pre-processing method to be able to reconstruct reflectors as close as 2.5 millimeters from the array. Again, the superiority of the spatial compounding image that we propose has been evaluated experimentally, and it can yield impressive SNRs compared to the state of the art, as I mentioned, 20 dBs. Finally, accurate reflection localization of reflectors as small as 3 millimeters has been experimentally presented, and effectively with this we want to benchmark the proposed compounding methodology for medical imaging applications. Thank you very much.